What's something that you know is true but just can't prove it? My friend's dad married a black widow, and I believe she will kill again. All three of her husbands died shortly after marrying her. She meets new victims through group grief counseling, and I have been in contact with the families of her previous husbands. In all three cases, she was the sole inheritor of all funds and property named in the wills. My friend knows for a fact that her mother wanted her to receive certain belongings. Her mother died slowly from cancer, and they openly discussed plans for after her death. Then, when her father died, my friend discovered that he had updated his will and left everything to a woman he had known for only 8 months. The will was changed just days before he died. He was not in severe pain, yet she pushed morphine pills on him to help him sleep, and soon after, he was dead. The other families have very similar stories, and she's currently married again. She will kill again. I know it. Edit. I'm getting a lot of the same comments, so I'm going to address some of the points below. 5 is kind of the most important for me and why a podcast likely won't happen. 1. Remember, it's not my dad. It was my friend's dad. And one thing that wasn't in the original post, but a child comment, is that it actually isn't her biological dad. Her mom was a junkie and ran off and is likely dead. Her dad was abusing her too, so the neighbors took her in. They never formally adopted her. That was an obstacle for sure for legal rights and stuff. She didn't even know he wasn't her dad until she was 18. He just signed for stuff as her parent-child guardian, and nobody ever checked. He was a good man for taking her in, but not doing it right kinda screwed her. He was a simple man in the South, very old-fashioned, and didn't care for government paperwork. Turns out her siblings weren't siblings either. The family took in several kids throughout their life. Good people. 2. I don't care if you don't believe me. I don't care if you think I'm a karma or I know my story is real. 3. We have warned the family of the new guy. He luckily survived his cancer. So I don't know what the woman's plans are, but they have been warned. 4. One of the other families did try to get in contact with the FBI. Yes, we did try to get the insurance companies to try to help fight it. That went nowhere too. Even if suspicious, we have no actual proof. Courts, police, insurance companies want more than suspicions. 5. My friend has asked me to stop pushing this, and I'm going to respect that. She has had a rough life, and this has affected her deeply. Shortly after this, she became an addict, got a DUI, and almost killed herself due to depression. It was a very bad time in her life, and she just wants it all behind her. We have done what we can to warn people, and there isn't much more we can do. This was more than 10 years ago now. She has her life straight and is trying to move on. I have to respect that. Story 2. Cornwall, Ontario is often referred to as the cancer capital of Canada. The former Domtar paper plant, along with other heavy industries, contaminated the water table in and around the town. Toxic waste is buried behind the Walmart. Most cancer patients are treated in Ottawa and are counted in Ottawa's statistics, which obscures where they actually come from. Nearly everyone who lives in that town develops cancer. The government suppresses the data because if it became public, the entire town would be condemned and sealed off. Story 3. Jason, a kid from down the street, was over at my house. We were playing with my toys and having a great time. After he left, I noticed one of my yo-yos was missing. I'm pretty sure that jerk took it. It was 1979, so any proof is long gone. Story 4. Neanderthals died out through genocide by humans. It was not peaceful interbreeding that gave us Neanderthal DNA, but essay and murder. Behaviors humans have been known for since the beginning of recorded time. Documentaries often frame it as rainbows and sunshine, but humans do not even treat other humans that way. Never mind a completely different species competing for the same hunting grounds and fresh water. I have seen some recent documentaries suggesting that humans were simply more adaptable to a rapidly changing environment, but even they admit there are many unknowns. It is strange to think that Neanderthals existed for far longer than we have, yet we have pushed the world to its limits in barely 100 years. Another theory is that humans are just bat crap, and we evolved with an insatiable curiosity that Neanderthals lacked. Looking at the distribution of Neanderthal fossils, we noticed they seemed to stop spreading whenever they encountered large bodies of water. It's not as if they weren't intelligent or lacked boats. We know they lived in complex social groups, created art, and did have boats. The most likely difference is that crossing a large body of water requires a certain kind of madness. It's entirely plausible that Neanderthals and other Homo species were just as intelligent as us, but what set humans apart was an insatiable curiosity and the drive to push into the unknown just to see what was there. Story 5. The concept of soulmates and true love was invented thousands of years ago by men who were terrible in bed and wanted to control women so they would not discover that physical intimacy is supposed to be enjoyable for us too. They claimed that women had to remain virgins until marriage, otherwise they would never meet their soulmate or true love because they were impure and therefore unworthy. Eventually, this idea was tied into religion. No one has a soulmate. No one will ever find some mythical true love. It is all toxic purity culture nonsense, and we should be free to have safe, consensual relations with as many people as we want once we are adults. Also, all Bigfoot sightings are just human beings who have chosen to live apart from society. They wear the skins of animals they kill for food. Their feet are larger than normal because they do not wear mass-produced shoes that restrict growth, and some of them probably make fake feet on purpose. They do not have access to razors or modern grooming, so their faces grow very hairy. Whenever a human skeleton is found in the woods and cannot be identified, even with DNA testing, it is labeled a mystery. But it is really just Bigfoot. Story 6. When you dream, you are just visiting other timelines. When I dream and see my mom, I do not think, oh shit, you're alive. It just feels normal, and we have normal conversations. In my waking life, I often think about her death and how much I miss her. But in those dreams, she is sober and living an ordinary life, working a job, owning a car. I believe there are alternate timelines or realities where my mom gets to live a real, impactful human existence and does not die at 39 after years of drug abuse. One where she was raised by two loving parents, neither of whom abused drugs or abused her or allowed men to abuse her. She was sober when she died, but decades of meth use, combined with her many health conditions, had already deteriorated her body. My dad died of OD when I was 19. I cannot remember how old he was, maybe 39 as well. That was 10 years ago now, and I never see him in my dreams anymore, even though I wish I did. I do not know what that means for my theory. Maybe he died in every timeline because he never found one where he lived a normal life. We were not close, but I do miss him. I choose to believe my theory, even if it is silly, because I want my mom to be happy somewhere. She had a very hard life and was truly never given a chance. Sorry, mine was dark. Much of my life is. But this prompt was actually cathartic for me, so thank you for the thought provocation. Story 7. Companies no longer make appliances that last on purpose. Not only are they designed not to last, they're also designed to be more cost-effective to replace than to repair. I had my 5-year-old refrigerator, about $1,500 MSRP, go out a few years ago. I called the manufacturer's repair line, and they referred me to a local certified repair shop that wanted $280 just for a diagnostic service call. I then called several other local, non-certified repair shops and found one technician who told me to remove a panel on the back and send him a video of the flashing diagnostic light. 2 minutes later, without charging me anything, he said, the fault code meant it was either a bad compressor or a bad condenser. He quoted roughly $1,300 in parts and explained that, in his opinion, it would be wise to replace both components, since if one fails, the other usually follows. Soon after, factoring in his hourly rate and the estimated repair time, I would save about $400 by just buying a new refrigerator instead. Story 8. My uncle married a woman who had been married 4 times before him. She didn't kill her husbands, but each time she changed her name and identity, and each time she took everything they had. They dated for years before getting married. After about a year of marriage, he came home one day to an empty house. Completely empty. Clothes, furniture, appliances, lawnmowers. Everything was gone. It looked like no one had ever lived there. All the credit cards were maxed out and every account was drained. She had taped the divorce papers to the front door. He hired a private investigator and discovered the previous 4 husbands and multiple aliases. Later, she married a wealthy man and tried to pull the same stunt. But this time, she ended up in prison. She served 5 years and was released on parole, then immediately disappeared. She never checked in with her parole officer even once. She had warrants in multiple states and was reportedly on a most wanted list. Multiple agencies were looking for her, and then she was just gone. The last known sighting was at a gas station in the town where the wealthy husband lived. That was 25 years ago. It's a cold case now. My aunt, his sister, still keeps tabs on it because she wants to see justice done. The rest of us think justice may have already been served. Story 9. Intelligent life exists on other planets, or at least has at some point. The observable universe is estimated to be over 90 billion light-years across and nearly 15 billion years old. Earth is one of over 1 quintillion planets in the observable universe. At some point, in those 15 billion years, one of those quadrillion-plus planets has hosted intelligent life, or will host intelligent life. That said, I believe whatever life did exist, exists, or will exist, is simply too far away from us, and we from it, for us to ever cross paths. There are not little green men from Mars stealing cows and crashing in New Mexico, but there is something out there. I think the uncertainty is far more fascinating than anything the X-Files could dish out. Story 10. Bigfoot was real at some point, even if he is not anymore. There are great apes in several other parts of the world, so it is not comparable to unicorns or Mothman. We know a great ape existed in North America. We have fossils to prove it. The ecology of North America changed dramatically during colonization, which we also know led to the extinction of dozens of species. Multiple Native American tribes have oral histories describing a Bigfoot-like creature. It is not crazy to think that Bigfoot may have been a great ape that humans wiped out before it could be formally documented with hard evidence. Yet in science, you can get blackballed just for seriously considering the idea. That is what is mind-blowing. This is not some mythical being, but a member of an animal group that still exists around the world, one we simply do not know for certain existed in this specific location during a period that overlapped with humans. Fossil animals existing alongside humans is not unprecedented either. Just look at coelacanths. Story 11. My mother's husband, not my dad, staged a break-in at their house and blamed me. I was an easy target at the time because I was actively addicted. He busted door frames, tossed the house, and some things went missing. The police came to my job and caused a scene. I believe he did it for insurance money. I don't know the exact details, but I know it was about money, and my mother let it happen. They're going through a divorce now. I confronted my mother about it again, and she acted like she had always questioned what happened. Sure, you were part of it. A few years later, I was told their missing laptop was found in their garage with a note that said, "Haha, screw you. Why would I do that? If I had done it for drug money, why would I leave a note like that?" I'm sober now, of course, but I still want the truth about what really happened. I know I'll never get it. Story 12. I believe slavery was abolished not out of morality, but because it is more expensive than capitalism. We are kept in poverty on purpose. We are exactly where they want us to be. If they gave us no hope at all, we would rebel. Instead, we are given just enough. If we save for 20 years, maybe we can buy our dream car. If we pay a mortgage for 50 years, maybe we can own a home. There is just enough time and just enough hope to keep us going, to make us say, if I try really hard for long enough. That is exactly what they want. It is easier and cheaper to give us just enough money to survive and call it our own motivation, which it isn't, than to enslave people outright and constantly fight rebellion. It is also easier and cheaper to plant desires in our heads, the expensive car, the designer bag, the holiday at a 5-star hotel, so we spend decades working toward dreams they created for us. It is literally cheaper to give us something than nothing at all. The only reason we are not slaves, in my view, is because this system costs less, not because those in power are merciful. Story 13. This is going to sound stupid, but I'm 100% convinced that post-nut clarity is the closest a human ever gets to actual enlightenment. Think about it. For about 90 seconds, all the noise just stops. The ego, the anxiety, the weird, desperate wants all vanish. What's left is the cold, hard, inconvenient truth about whatever you were obsessing over. Why am I texting my ex? I definitely should not buy that. This life choice is terrible. If we could somehow bottle that brain state and serve it at the UN or in Congress, it would be game over. Wars would end. Bad relationships would die. Impulse purchases would get canceled. We would solve everything in one deeply awkward, incredibly productive summit. It's the universe's meanest joke that our clearest thinking happens right after we've made the dumbest possible decision. Story 14. Our entire universe may exist within a black hole. The Big Bang could have been the creation of that black hole, with matter spreading across vast distances, forming gases that eventually condensed into planets. The expanding universe might be the result of the black hole we inhabit growing larger and spewing more dark matter into our universe, increasing the space between particles of matter. This idea was formally proposed by theoretical physicist Lee Smolin in the 1990s in his book Life of the Cosmos. He goes further, applying principles of biological natural selection to the cosmological scale, envisioning an ever-expanding tree of nested universes. The mechanism for selection comes from allowing the free parameters of the standard model of physics to be slightly altered at each white hole or singularity event by some as yet unknown quantum effects. This allows a natural selective process to emerge, where universes are favored if they are more likely to produce black holes. Using an RNA-DNA analogy, Smolin suggests that in lower-order universes there may have been only primordial black holes. But after enough iterations, universes begin producing galactic black holes, then stellar black holes, and so on. Going further, he speculates that the purpose of organized life could ultimately relate to the exponential increase in energy requirements. Species and ecosystems are driven either toward extinction or toward producing black holes, whether deliberately or incidentally. Story 15. The Amtrak crash in Philadelphia in May 2015 was caused by early teenagers throwing rocks at passing trains from an overpass. All day, police reports had documented kids hurling rocks at trains. One rock struck at the worst possible moment, shattering the windshield and hitting the engineer. This worker, known for being extremely safety conscious, was listening to reports about the rock strikes when it happened. He was knocked unconscious. With no one at the controls, the train entered a curve too fast and derailed. Many passengers were injured or killed. This was essentially a terrorist attack on infrastructure. But you can't blame middle schoolers or freshmen for a mass casualty event. The engineer ended up taking the blame, even though the crash was the result of a systemic failure. Story 16. Parallel dimensions that we visit in our dreams. I've had dreams where I go and live another life in another city, with the same people I know. Almost the same, but slightly different. Edit. I had no idea so many people felt the same way. I visited at least 2 different versions of my life. One is post-apocalyptic. No electricity, no law, and violent people roaming the streets. The other is an alternate city where I live among many familiar places. I've mostly visited a shopping mall at the base of 3 tower buildings, a multi-story church with an underground school, and a large public bus system spread across a valley near the mountains. I've returned to the same area in multiple dreams. Story 17. Santa Claus might have been a Hindu cult leader. Maybe. The real Saint Nicholas of Myra lived in the late 200s to early 300s AD. In 325, Byzantine Emperor Constantine declared Christianity the official state religion of the Eastern Roman Empire, also known as the Byzantine Empire. But there was no single, agreed-upon definition of what Christianity was at the time. To address this, he convened the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, composed of major bishops from across the empire. The goal of the council was to solidify Trinitarian Christianity and to purge Gnosticism and Arianism. Gnosticism was an early Christian collection of sects that blended Hindu concepts, often via Persian Zoroastrianism, into Jesus' teachings. Ideas like being one with God, enlightenment, karma, and cycles of creation, all rooted in Hindu thought, appear in Gnostic texts. It was especially popular with the plebeian caste, the working poor and outcasts, because it taught that all people were fundamentally equal and good, and that caste or social hierarchy was meaningless. This naturally did not sit well with the ruling class. As the patron saint of sailors, S-workers, and children, figures of high moral significance, Saint Nicholas became a champion of the lower plebeians, making him, in some ways, not exactly a friend of the empire. Nicholas was supposedly at the Council of Nicaea in 325, but there are 3 known lists of attendees, and the one that mentions him was written 225 years later by a man named Theodore Lector. Theodore was a church scribe, writing long after the council, during a time when church and state were effectively one entity. It would have been highly beneficial for the state to slip Nicholas's name into the list after his death. Nicholas wasn't just a bishop, he was extremely popular. Emperor Justinian even named a church after him. The smoking gun is that there are 2 surviving chapters of the life of St. Nicholas. In these chapters, Nicholas threatens politicians, stops executions, and even enters people's dreams. In the 440 AD encomium of Nicholas by St. Proclus, Archbishop of Constantinople, Proclus describes Nicholas almost like a time-traveling, space-warping human angel, wrapped in the force of God like an aura. All of this is heavily coated with Gnostic and Hindu symbolism. So, it's plausible that Santa Claus was originally a Gnostic, Hindu-influenced cult figure, whose name was later used as a political propaganda tool centuries after his death. Story 18. Some things truly do happen for a pie. Reason. When I saw my cat's ad at the shelter, I just knew. He was the one. Getting him felt like he'd always been here in a way I can't really explain. Then, his medical issues, which were already noted by the shelter, started getting worse. I knew about his history, but I didn't know it would progress like this. Now, he's on an expensive diet and medications. Many people might have returned him to a shelter or opted for euthanasia too soon. But I keep putting him first because I love him. I know he's getting closer to that difficult line, but for now, I take comfort knowing he's loved and has a vet nearby who understands his history. I'm his second home. He spent most of his life in that shelter, from kitten to adopted to quickly returned, and then adopted by me later. Now he's home, and when the time comes to say goodbye, I know he'll feel loved. It hurts me. But I also know I'm giving him something so many cats never experience, the best possible chance and as much love as I can provide, for as long as it's humane. He may recover one day, but he may not. He has urinary crystals and takes pain medication twice a day. He's still happy, cuddly, and playful, though the pain sometimes returns midday. I stay in close contact with his vet, so we're all on the same page. 3 of his crystals won't dissolve, and he has another UA next month. No blockages so far, but he has strained in the past. Hug your fur babies for me. Time with them is never guaranteed, and they're in our lives for reasons none of us will ever fully understand. Love them the way they love you, truly, unconditionally. Story 19. I believe my grandpa was murdered by staff at his long-term care facility during the pandemic. He had dementia with some behavioral issues, but most of the time he was just confused, and he was usually a gentle, sweet man. The facility assured us they could handle patients with dementia and challenging behaviors. Then he got into a fight with another resident. Both were fine, but they were taken to the hospital for monitoring. The care facility refused to take him back. After a long fight, they eventually relented and brought him back from the hospital. But shortly after that, he caught COVID. He was kept in isolation for a couple of weeks until he had no symptoms at all and was supposed to be released from isolation the next day. He died that night, with no explanation other than COVID. Because COVID was listed as the official cause of death, an autopsy was not covered and would have had to be done privately at a cost of thousands of dollars, something my grieving grandmother could not bring herself to do. Everyone says he died of natural causes, but I believe the staff simply did not want to deal with him anymore and had a convenient cover during the pandemic. There is no way to prove it now, but I think I will always believe foul play was involved. Story 20. There are beings beyond this reality, not gods, not angels or demons, but sentient beings not unlike ourselves. There are realities like ours, with growth and evolution similar to what we observe and experience. Consciousness bridges all of this, and these realities are generated and influenced by our understanding of it and by the outcomes we focus on. One of the oldest known sun-like stars in our galaxy, HD 71334, is about 8.2 billion years old, roughly 4 billion years older than our Sun. If an Earth-like planet formed there at a similar point in its history as Earth did in our solar system, and if life evolved on a comparable timeline, any intelligent species that emerged would have had a 4 billion year head start on us. To put that into perspective, humans went from stone tools to artificial intelligence in only about 10,000 years. Essentially nothing on a cosmic timescale. A civilization with even 1 million years on us would already be beyond our imagination. 4 billion years is so far beyond that there is no meaningful comparison. We tend to picture aliens as slightly more advanced versions of ourselves. HD 71334 suggests something much stranger. If intelligence is common, then most of it could be billions of years older, operating on levels we would not even recognize. Story 21. I think the CIA is treating the entire planet like a Vault-Tec-style social experiment, and I believe that nearly every person with real power and wealth at the time ended up on Epstein's Island. Not because they knew what was going on, but because it was presented as an exclusive resort for celebrities and the ultra-rich. Honestly, if I could not go to a resort in Hawaii without being harassed by paparazzi, I would probably accept an invitation to a private island too. I think it is possible the island was created as a way to gain leverage over influential people. including, and especially, future presidents. Want to say no to the government? Well, remember that little island you visited last year? It would be a shame if there were photos of you lounging by the pool that suddenly surfaced. I also think the Diddy parties are likely a modern replica of that same concept. We will probably hear shocking things about them for a while, until attention shifts to the next project, a project that is likely already underway or being set up right now. Story 22. Because she was the last person on the phone with him before he did it, I believe my brother's ex-wife said something that triggered him to off himself. She claims he said he would wait for someone to get there before she hung up. But given that she was on the phone with him for about 30 minutes before informing my mom and granddad that he was in crisis, given that it was a 5-minute drive from my mom's house to where my brother lived, and given that she has since started claiming he was abusive, which he was not, and had been telling him that her attempt at self-harm the week before was his fault and that she would be better off without him, I think she was getting exactly what she wanted and let it happen. I will never be able to prove it. She would not allow anyone in our family to access his phone since they were still legally married and the police still have it. So all I am left with is the knowledge that she treated him terribly, isolated him, and gaslit him into believing everything was his fault. More than enough reason, in my mind, to blame her. I do not know what she had been saying to him all day. All I know is that the police chief spoke with my mom and me and said that, while he had not found anything arrestable, he believed she had pushed him toward it based on what he had read so far. That tells me whatever was said over text before the phone call must have been bad. Unfortunately, being a bish, being mentally abusive, and breaking someone down is not illegal. So, she is free to continue poisoning their kids against the little memory they have of their dad. Story 23. While living with my ex and her sons, her eldest raided my comic book collection, stealing all of my first appearances and my most valuable comics. I knew a few comics were missing, but I didn't realize my collection had been so thoroughly raided, until a friend, looking at it, pointed out that every first appearance I should have had was gone. For example, to those who don't understand, I would have a run of 30 issues of a comic, with every single issue, except for the ones featuring the first appearance of a new character, missing. It happened often enough in my collection that when I had it appraised, they said it was obvious somebody had rated it for the first appearances. I blame my ex's oldest son because he was very familiar with comics and always carried around a price guide. My comic book collection was in the living room since it was too large to fit anywhere else. He was also known to trade many things with a local shady shop owner. The sad part is that he probably traded thousands of dollars worth of comics for just a few used video games. Story 24. I believe trees have self-aware spirits living in them and that they appreciate tokens of respect. Look, I'm a 21st century technologically adept woman with a graduate degree and a professional job. But once, when I placed my hand on a bent-over oak in southern Germany, I had an immediate flash of recognition. I saw the spirit of that tree, and it was a happy old man, fat Buddha happy. At my current house, we have an ash tree growing in the backyard. Every equinox and solstice, we go out and hang charms and ornaments in its branches and pour fancy liquor around its roots. Since we've been doing this, the tree is stronger, greener, leafier, and, I swear, happier. Can I prove any of this? Of course not, but it's true. Story 25. I believe, without proof, that Elon Musk and Peter Thiel stole the 2024 election for Trump through Starlink satellites, allegedly connected to voting machines via an addressable link in the Palantir battery backup system. This is my personal theory. In an interview, Elon's child repeated something they claim to have heard from him. They'll never know, followed by laughter. Trump also hinted at it in his usual strange way when he said, Elon knows about those voting machines and we won Pennsylvania big. Thanks, Elon. This came from a man who danced around for half an hour at a press conference as if he did not even need to campaign, and who told Christians that if they voted for him this time, it would be fixed so good they would never have to vote again. Also, what are the odds that Trump won all 7 swing states? Here in Arizona, the majority voted for Democrats down the ballot, yet those same voters supposedly chose Trump at the top. In Rockland County, New York, something similar happened, but not a single top of the ticket vote went to Kamala. No, I can't prove any of this. The Starlink satellite allegedly involved was decommissioned and destroyed, along with a Palantir software feature they claim can erase digital footprints. Still, from where I'm standing, it sure looks like that's exactly what happened. Story 26. I think China has listening devices in some of the products they sell to us. I had one of those 6-in-1 stereo systems with Bluetooth, CD, and record player functions, and it completely stopped working. It would not play CDs or connect to Bluetooth anymore. I turned on the radio and started scanning stations, and I suddenly heard a full conversation in Mandarin between two men. At one point, I heard a little girl playing in the background, and one of the men said something to her to be quiet. Right after that, they both went silent. It was the strangest thing. It did not sound like a radio broadcast at all. It felt more like I was eavesdropping on a conversation in the next room. None of the usual pop, country, or other stations came through. Everything was just static until I landed on that conversation. Story 27. I hypothesized that some memories can be genetically transferred. When I was a baby, I used to dream about what I called my rose garden. The dreams gradually became less frequent, but I was always happy to return to that place. I had the last dream about my rose garden when I was 3 years old. In the dreams, the roses were cherished and carefully tended by me, and I was a young woman. When the dream stopped, I felt deeply sad, like I had lost something important. Story 28. Global warming is part of the natural cycle of things, and much of the hype and blame game around it is nonsense. The Victorian era was considered a mini ice age only about 125 years ago, a brief blip, a geological millisecond in Earth's history. We do not have sufficient scientific data to prove that the planet should not, on a global average, be as warm as it is now. In fact, ice core data shows that Earth has been considerably hotter than it is today for vast periods of geological time. It is not your fault for sending waste to landfill, and it is not your fault for driving a car. We do not really care about saving the planet. It does not need saving and will be just fine. What we actually care about is saving ourselves. We should be focusing on practical measures, like moving populations out of floodplains, rather than trying to hold back sea levels by symbolic gestures, as if refusing to turn up the central heating will change the outcome. We are being conned. I do agree that we should not be dumping plastic or chemicals into our rivers and seas. I also agree that we should not be cutting down all the trees. But the current eco-panic looks like late-stage capitalism at its ugliest, guaranteed to fail, designed for someone at the top to profit from it, and overall, complete nonsense. Story 29. No one is individually conscious. Let me explain. In the scenario of eternal oblivion, once you die, consciousness ends forever, rational and scientific. In the scenario of reincarnation, you begin a new life with no memory of the previous ones. Your past self was still you, but you cannot remember it because the brain that held those memories no longer exists. My belief is that the truth lies somewhere between these two. Everyone is everyone, meaning there is really only one consciousness, not a collective New Age hive mind, but an objective property of nature that is emergently produced by the brain and yet, in a technical sense, simultaneously experienced. This is not an optimistic view. When the universe inevitably becomes inhospitable to sustaining the emergent property of consciousness, you will be effectively and eternally oblivious. It also means that we truly are alone. If subjectivity is an illusion, then there is no one else, no one in this galaxy, in the past, in the future, or across the entirety of the universe as it has ever existed or ever will exist. We stand alone on the edge of oblivion. In that sense, I almost feel sorry for God, if it does exist, forever fooling itself, diminishing itself into believing that it is not alone. I cannot fully explain why this makes the most logical sense to me, but it does. It is essentially eternal oblivion with extra steps, yet I think most people overlook the individuality aspect of it. They take it for granted that I am me and you are you, without really questioning it any deeper. I believe that all your memories, your personality, everything you consider to be yourself, dies when you die. But the experience of consciousness itself is not unique. It is not as though the universe creates a brand new, individual, one-of-a-kind subjective consciousness every time something becomes conscious. It is more like opening a new browser tab, effectively isolated but still part of the same underlying system. Like the hard problem of consciousness, this idea makes no practical difference at all, so it is really just for fun. I still ultimately believe that consciousness is not eternal. And no, I have never taken mushrooms, and I do not have schizophrenia. Story 30. Here in New Zealand, there's been a recent flood of cheap appliances. Fridges, TVs, frigging vacuum cleaners, all sorts of stuff. Prices are cheaper than usual, with specials well beyond what's normal. My theory is that these appliances have been shipped here because the American tariff situation has impacted sales in the States. Those appliances have to go somewhere, and when there's an oversupply in a market, prices drop. I can't prove any of this, of course. It's just my theory. Story 31. That every single person you meet has some tiny story or little quirk that could completely change the way you see them if you just dug a bit deeper. Someone might seem totally ordinary, but there's some wild, amazing, or heartbreaking part of their life that never comes out unless you're really paying attention. I can't prove it because you can't know everyone's private world, but I feel it every time I meet someone new. It makes life feel kind of magical. Story 32. Several native alliums in Virginia, commonly called wild onion, develop bulbs that can grow suspiciously large in good soil. That makes me think they may not be truly wild, but rather feral descendants of once cultivated crops. My theory is that they were domesticated by Native Americans but never adopted by European colonists, who instead brought their own preferred onions and garlic to grow. I've looked for peer-reviewed research examining these plants' genomes for signs of past domestication, but I haven't found anything suggesting that scientists have seriously explored the question. Story 33. I had a friend from my past who died. They said he took a pill with a friend, and that's what killed him. A few years later, during Hurricane Ian, I was in South Florida staying at a motel. I went to Walgreens or CVS to get supplies for the incoming storm, and when I walked in, I saw him. I was completely flabbergasted and just stared at him. He was wearing sunglasses inside, and it looked like he was staring back at me too. I had my kid with me, who kept asking me something, so I had to divert my gaze to answer. I kept walking to the aisle I needed, glancing back over my shoulder because I couldn't believe what I'd seen. I got to the aisle, crouched down to grab what I needed, and then I heard a hushed, shocked female voice say, "It's my name!" I grabbed the item and rushed back to the front to confront him, but they were gone. I went and creeped his wife's Facebook, and her location was the same place where he was spotted, so I'm pretty sure he faked his death for whatever reason. Out of all my friends, he would definitely have been voted most likely to fake his own death. He was probably my #1 sketchy, shady friend back in the day. No one believes me. Whenever I've mentioned it, people tell me it was probably a doppelganger, but I know who I saw, and I know what I heard. Story 34. The NFL injury rate is increasing because a growing percentage of athletes are now operating at almost transhuman levels of speed and strength, while still being constrained by essentially human bodies. We're hitting the upper limits of what the human body can withstand, and then pushing past that line with almost every player. What used to represent the top 1% of athleticism is now far more common, so those athletes stand out much less than they once did. Story 35. Devices with microphones are always listening, not just when an app is being used or running in the background. I mean, the microphone is always on. Everything I've researched says otherwise, but there's no convincing me. Story 36. I think that giving kids phones and tablets from the age of 2 or even younger is, for lack of a better word, messing with their imagination, or at least affecting their lifelong cognitive development in ways we don't yet fully understand. Some of it might be beneficial, but I have a feeling that not all of it is. Kids' toys have traditionally been quite basic, a lump of plastic or wood at the end of the day. It's only imagination and boundless energy, coupled with a brain eager to form new connections, that can turn that simple piece of wood into a steed, or a lump of plastic into a spaceship carrying you to far-off lands. Now, endless YouTube videos for kids use addictive algorithms to keep them watching. Everything is delivered passively, and rich audiovisual content is being streamed directly into their developing brains. That has to have effects that no prior generation was ever subject to. Story 37. My former boss accused me in front of the entire company of stealing thousands of dollars right after I put in my notice, without providing a shred of proof. Ironically, their family member, the one I spent an insane amount of time training and had to promote despite them being terrible at the job, was arrested last week for stealing those same thousands of dollars over the course of 4 years. My former boss had to know. The numbers started looking insane after their family member was hired, and the thefts continued long after I left. Their plan? I'll just blame the angry black woman who complained about not getting paid enough, and that family member would have gotten away with it if it weren't for the meddling forensic accountant. Story 38. I believe that the culture of giving reviews has killed quality, both in products and services. Most people write a review after their first visit, first experience, or first use of a product. But if we waited 5 years, either the company or the reputation would speak for itself. Or we'd be able to honestly say that the stove is completely falling apart, the dentist is a jerk, or the shirt ended up in the garbage after a year of use. Meanwhile, because of all the quick positive reviews, companies profit from cheap production, cutting corners, and likely making enough to push out another low-quality product. Story 39. Those overseas factories making luxury items like Yeti coolers or name-brand clothes? I'm convinced that after fulfilling their required production numbers, they turn around and make the exact same items, using the same designs and materials, and sell their version on sites like Temu for much less, while still making a profit. I've bought backpacking camping chairs on Temu for $10 under a brand name like Happy Sunshine. I compared them to my cousin's name brand chair that cost $180. They were identical in every way. The plastic casting marks on the feet, the tread pattern, the fabric, even the stitching. The only difference was the name and the price. Story 40. I believe people can tell the future in limited ways. I had a dream about the towers falling just days before they did. I wrote about the strange dreams in my diary because I had never been to New York and did not even know what the towers were. I found the entry years later and burned the pages. There is no reason a 7-year-old should have such a vivid dream about watching a plane crash and then seeing the towers fall when they do not even know what they are. I once had a deeply disturbing dream where I was stumbling around my backyard, low to the ground, confused and scared, unable to think in words. My vision kept blacking out. When I woke up, I found my dog dead in the backyard. He was only 7 and had an undiagnosed heart problem. He had dropped dead. To this day, I cannot think of a more unsettling dream. I cannot help but suspect I was somehow experiencing his final moments. Story 41. I used to be damn near automatic at getting a perfect pump every time. Over the years, I've noticed it has become much harder to do. I usually end up a few cents over. Not a big deal, right? Well, in my mind, I would not put it past oil companies to have made it more difficult to stop the pump exactly where you want it. A few cents for a single person is not going to cause an issue, but if you extrapolate that over time, with millions of Americans pumping gas every single minute of the day, those extra few cents add up and create more profit. That is my only tinfoil hat theory, but I support it as a theory. Story 42. Ever since COVID, we have been collectively riding this emotional roller coaster, and I think, though I cannot prove it, that it has something to do with nutritional deficiencies. We went through a behavioral shock. More alcohol, less sunlight, more isolation, microplastics, cortisol. I do not know. I am not an expert. Maybe everyone could blast their gut with a daily vitamin, probiotic, and electrolyte, and we could see whether this mass depression lifts. Story 43. James. Patterson's book sells so many copies because stodgy businesses and institutions buy them for lobby bookshelves precisely because they are so generic and cookie cutter. And not many people actually read them. They all sell 11 billion copies, but I have never once in my life heard anyone talk about a James Patterson book, except Maximum Ride. Even the ones that were made into movies, I have never heard anyone discuss the books. Story 44. That many people with ADHD and/or autism were the hunters of early human societies. It is only in very recent times, on a large-scale historical perspective, that these brain adaptations have been considered abnormal. Neurotypical people were more likely the craftsmen, gatherers near the settlement, and farmers. Our brains are physically different in ways that can be clearly seen with modern scans. Those of us with ADHD and/or autism have the ability to comfortably sort through massive amounts of sensory information in natural settings and pick out what matters. With enough of the right kind of sensory input, we do not experience nearly the same level of focused distraction that we show indoors in artificial environments. Our brains work faster to move and communicate as a group, constantly adapting to changing conditions. Our hyperfocus helps us track prey for long periods and learn to evaluate their behaviors. Humans hunted by tracking, following, and harassing groups of prey over long distances until dehydration or exhaustion weakened the slowest, making them easy to kill. Once enough were taken down, other skills were needed to harvest everything useful and prepare most of the carcasses for transport back to the settlement. Our lack of strict time tracking would not have been a problem because long-term hunting did not follow a fixed schedule. Hunters had to move once it was light enough for a herd to start making noise and stay up after dark long enough to hunt the weak animals once the pack settled for the night, or to complete chores. Napping during the day would have been common, just as the prey animals napped. Specialization would have been a disadvantage, so hunting favored people who knew and could perform a wide range of skills like we do. Evolutionary traits take a long time to change, and some never do. The Industrial Revolution marked the beginning of a societal shift that strongly favored neurotypical traits while penalizing ours. The information age has changed society enough that some of our traits are now valued in creative fields like design, art, library sciences, and IT, the last of which can be far more creative than most people realize. But when placed in a typical office environment, with strict schedules, minimal or inappropriate sensory input, specialization and repetition, restricted communication, and near-constant supervision, it becomes clear why a hunter brain would struggle to perform, much less excel. Exhaustion and burnout often follow unless accommodations are provided. To those who work best in indoor, familiar environments, these accommodations may appear as unfair privileges, when in fact, they are necessary tools. A wheelchair, for example, might look like a privilege, being allowed to sit and be moved without effort, if you ignore the person's actual need to function. Story 45. I do think reincarnation is real. It is a scientific fact that energy cannot be destroyed, and so, in my opinion, the human body is just a vehicle for that energy that gives us consciousness. There is circumstantial evidence to support the idea, but it obviously cannot be proven. Story 46. I think most people are a lot lonelier than they seem, and that everyone carries at least one childhood memory that quietly shapes them in the background. Timing often ends up mattering more than effort in many life decisions, and we meet certain people at exactly the right moment, even when it feels completely random. Honestly, I believe most lucky situations are really just a series of small choices lining up in ways we only recognize in hindsight. Story 47. The Earth and space are part of a larger biological system, and we are simply so small that we cannot comprehend space as something like a biological fluid contained within a membrane. Everything happening on Earth may only serve the larger purpose of altering temperatures in very subtle ways, while at the same time, everything smaller than us is absolutely packed with tiny life clusters that we are too arrogant to see as similarly important or relatively advanced as ourselves. They are performing tasks that feel just as significant to them as our own feel to us, even though, from our perspective, they too may only seem to serve the larger purpose of altering temperatures in very mild ways. Story 48. This is my working, admittedly unhinged conspiracy theory, and I can't prove any of it. I believe Diddy may have wanted Tupac Shakur gone to eliminate a rival, and that it may not have been his first attempt. Hardly anyone talks about the Quad Studios shooting, where Tupac survived being shot 5 times, and I've always wondered whether that incident was connected. I also think Biggie Smalls eventually wanted to squash the East Coast-West Coast feud. He had been friends with Tupac, loved California, and even wrote about wanting to return. Part of me suspects that, beyond wanting peace, Biggie may have learned things about the earlier shooting and either threatened to go to the police or was believed he might. Then, 6 months later, he was killed as well. In this theory, Diddy's power allowed people to be paid off or intimidated into silence, including police mishandling the cases. I also think the release of Biggie's posthumous work was a way to profit from his death. Again, I can't prove any of this. It's just my personal conspiracy theory. Story 49. An alarming amount of human history is complete BS, fabricated by those writing it. I'm not saying everything, but I'm talking about hundreds of years of nonsense inserted all over the timeline. Yet there is no foolproof way to know what is real and what is exaggeration, outside of the small amount we can glean from vetted records and archaeological research. Story 50. The U.S. Commonwealth of Virginia will issue anyone who got a driver's license in their teens a new one on their 20th birthday to generate extra revenue. How does that work, you may ask? It means you're stuck with an under 21 vertically oriented government-issued ID until you're 28, which can get you denied alcohol or entry in some venues in other states unless you pay around $50 to get a new over 21 horizontally oriented license early. I got my first license at 18 and a half, but it was set to expire less than 2 years later, on my 20th birthday. They even sent me my replacement for free in the mail. I was stuck with an under 21 license that featured the same 16-year-old picture from my permit until I got fed up at 27 and paid for a new one when renewing my car's registration. If you live in Virginia, tell me if something similar happened to you. Story 51. My dad left me unattended in a car with a gun with the hope that I would use it on myself. Context. I'm a trans woman. I came out later in life at 43 years old. Before I began transitioning, I had depressive thoughts every single day of my life, and I mean that literally. At the time, I didn't understand why. Looking back now, since I've started transitioning, those thoughts are gone. My father has known since I was a teenager that I struggled with severe depression. He is a gun enthusiast and collector, and he has always stressed the importance of gun safety, which he follows strictly. Trigger guards, multiple gun safes, and proper storage and care of firearms were drilled into me. He also concealed carries and is licensed to do so. He carries a Glock everywhere he goes. A Glock is a type of pistol which feeds ammunition from a magazine. This detail is important. I'm a US citizen, but I came out while I was living overseas in London. I'd planned to spend the rest of my life there, but the UK is not a good place to transition. When it comes to trans rights and acceptance, it is basically Florida. Not knowing what else to do, I returned to the US. My parents offered to let me stay with them while I looked for work. I was feeling pretty low. I was transitioning medically, but not socially, because I didn't feel safe being out yet. Although my parents said on the phone that they were fine with me being trans, and I have a trans brother whom they adore, I quickly realized they were not comfortable with me being trans in their house. The depression started to come back, but I tried to push through it. Then, one morning, my dad offered to take me out for breakfast. Halfway there, he asked if I minded staying in the car while he went into a gun shop to talk to a friend. Just 5 minutes. I said, okay. My dad left, and I was alone in the car, in the cup holder, not the glove compartment, not tucked away somewhere. There was a loaded revolver. At the time, I thought my dad had stupidly, recklessly left his concealed carry weapon behind. It wasn't until a year or two later, after I had become estranged from him and my mom, different story, that I realized his concealed carry weapon was a pistol. That gun was left there for me, to use on myself. Story 52. I believe Elon Musk helped Trump steal the most recent election. Every single swing state went to him, yet many down ballot races went the other way. That seems statistically improbable, if not impossible. Add that to what they were openly saying at the time, and to the way Trump makes projection a core part of his personality. I genuinely think the results were digitally manipulated. To me, that also explains some of the absolutely unhinged behavior right before the election. They did not seem to care about winning people over or holding on to support because they did not think they had to. I can't prove any of this. It's simply what the pattern looks like to me. Story 53. I believe that all forms of economic and political competition are, in reality, an inside job. None of these people are true enemies of one another. They only pretend to be because it makes it easier to hold power and enrich themselves. That's why the left often seems so incompetent and incapable of making real impact. They are not even trying because there is no true left or right. There is only the government, or more accurately, the ruling class. That group includes politicians and billionaires alike. It is the same circle of people, all working toward the same goals and serving the same interests, their own. Another thing I believe is that they do not want to keep the rest of us around. That is why they are so enthusiastic about artificial intelligence. Once machines can do everything, they will no longer need us, the proles. We will be left to die in the streets from disease and starvation. Why keep a restless population that constantly demands wages and human rights when machines will obey orders without question? The simple answer, to me, is that there is no reason. Story 54. Hear me out. In 2020, when Charles Booker was running for the Democratic nomination to go up against Mitch McConnell, he was polling very, very well. He was expected to beat McConnell. He is a black man from Louisville in Jefferson County, a largely black city that he was projected to win. As votes started being tallied, the Louisville polls were still open. He was projected to beat Amy McGrath, a representative in Democratic clothing who had already lost to McConnell more than once. All of a sudden, there was major unexpected traffic due to surprise construction on the main highway leading to the largest and I believe only polling place in Jefferson County. Hundreds of people were stuck in traffic as the polls were closing and were unable to vote. Amy McGrath won by approximately 2%. Mitch McConnell's wife is Elaine Chao, who was the Secretary of Transportation under Trump in 2020. Mitch knew that if Amy won the nomination, he had already won the election. Story 55. Recollection of childhood memories is not necessarily reconstruction or reinterpretation shaped by later experiences to fit an autobiographical narrative. It can simply be the act of applying more precise language, learned later in life, to better communicate emotions that were genuinely experienced at the time. I am not suggesting that humans do not sometimes rewrite their personal histories. However, when someone is speaking strictly about their own experiences and reactions, and assuming they have the relevant information, these retroactive explanations are not inherently revisionist. Story 56. Homo sapiens may be naturally and inherently divided into two broader, as yet undiscovered groups, defined by differences in thinking and worldview, distinct ways of perceiving and understanding reality. These divisions would predate culture and could help explain the persistent left-right political and ideological leanings, as well as progressive and conservative orientations seen throughout history and across most civilizations. This would be something beyond culture, unrelated to race or any surface-level traits. I suspect it is a feature intrinsic to our species, perhaps a complex genetic and behavioral mechanism that serious scientific inquiry has not yet fully assembled or understood. Such a mechanism could explain a great deal about humanity and its history, the rise and fall of civilizations, the core functioning of societies, and the psychology of individuals. There appears to be a gap in our understanding of human nature, something crucial that some people sense exists, and that others already exploit, even without fully comprehending it, in order to exert influence and control, often with poor intentions. I also suspect that the emergence and rise of the internet has had a direct and powerful effect on this still obscure dimension of human psychology, triggering an unprecedented shift on a nearly global scale. This, I believe, is a grave matter. Story 57. I think that something akin to philosophical zombies may exist. We already know there are people who lack cognitive features we typically consider fundamental to the human experience. Some people do not have a mind's eye. Some lack an inner monologue. Others lack empathy entirely, or do not experience fear or pain. I genuinely believe that there are individuals who lack internal consciousness or metacognitive abilities altogether. I do not think this belief is particularly strange. Human development and cognition are extraordinarily complex, and deviations from what we consider a typical developmental path occur all the time. Those people are still people. I simply know individuals whom I am certain do not possess any meaningful awareness of their own internal states and lack the ability to think about their own thinking. Some of my cousins come to mind. I have never known them to behave in ways that were not entirely driven by social scripts provided by others. Across decades of conversation, I have never heard an original thought, nor anything that suggested an awareness of their own awareness. I do not hold this belief with the intent of denigrating people whom I think might be philosophical zombies. I do not believe they are somehow less than human, nor that they should be denied the same respect or rights everyone deserves. I see this more as a form of neurodivergence. The human mind can take many forms, and this may simply be one of them. That said, I do think it should influence how we interact with such people and the expectations we place on them. It took me far too long to realize that asking my cousins to do things like examine their own beliefs consistently led to emotional meltdowns. In retrospect, I think I was asking them to do something they literally could not do. Maybe metacognitive abilities can be developed through practice, or maybe they cannot. That is something that should be researched more seriously. In the meantime, I believe philosophical zombies are real. Story 58. The men in black exist. They are likely just another government intelligence agency tasked with handling more complex situations than typical organizations. They probably do not even wear black suits most of the time, since that would draw attention. Why? Because every functional civilization has some form of secret police, dating back to the dawn of time. The reason is simple. Most people have families, lives, children, partners, and responsibilities, and they do not have the time to meticulously track every political or global event. Governments therefore maintain groups, likely offshoots of the NSA, that conceal information or pressure people into silence. Without this, the average person would constantly be on edge, overwhelmed by knowledge of things most normal lives do not account for. the world itself would become an existential threat to them, driving many into paranoia or dependence on antidepressants. As with every civilization that has endured, the United States maintains a discrete intelligence agency to prevent ordinary people from discovering such truths. Story 59. Here's a wild notion I had last night just before drifting off to sleep. The reason so-called impossible old young galaxies have recently been discovered much closer to the singularity, which unfurled space-time in what we call the Big Bang, than where they should be. These are mature galaxies that are so far unexplainable because they appear to violate what we understand about stellar formation. Such star systems require prolonged cycles of birth and death to produce certain complex elements that we only observe in later, mature systems, something that was not thought to occur until much later in the creation of the cosmos. And yet, they are already present. The idea is this: if we assume the universe is deterministic, and that everything that will eventually occur existed as a certain-to-happen potential right from the beginning, there may have been a fantastically brief moment after the Planck time when space-time was still mostly folded in on itself, and when something close to infinite energy was available for wild physics to occur. In that moment, those impossible early galaxies, which appear as though they should have formed much later in time, actually did or would have. They may have effectively time-traveled back to the start of everything, duplicates of more mature galaxies that would later be created again in their proper era. This could have some connection to an eternal cycling or rebirthing process fundamental to all of existence. Story 60. My uncle was murdered by his ex-wife's boyfriend over custody of the children. One day, my uncle disappeared while windsurfing. It was a calm day, and he was an excellent swimmer, having served as a lifeguard in the Navy. In the area where he was windsurfing, his body should have been located quickly, yet it was never found. At the time, his ex-wife had come down from Alaska to the lower 48 states for her final custody hearing. If she lost, she would have no further right to appeal. 2 days after she arrived, her boyfriend also traveled from Alaska to the same town. The following day, my uncle went missing, and shortly after that, the boyfriend returned to Alaska. Once my uncle was officially ruled missing and presumed dead, his ex-wife immediately took the children back to Alaska. She did not even take the children by their home to collect any clothes or personal belongings. Ultimately, about 10 years later, my uncle's remains were found. The reason they had not been located earlier was that they were discovered on a prison island. The island was approximately 10 miles up current from where he would have been when he disappeared. There is no way his remains could have ended up on that island unless they were deliberately placed there. My belief is that the boyfriend came down and rented, stole, or borrowed a boat. He then shot my uncle. Whether he shot him while he was on the water or after bringing him to land, I do not know. He then transported the body and dumped it on the prison island. When my uncle's remains were finally found, there was not enough left to determine the cause of death. Story 61. The reason the uncanny valley exists, the unsettling feeling we get from things that are almost human, is, in my view, rooted in our evolution. Over thousands of years, humans may have been effectively programmed to defend ourselves against other things that were not quite human. I am not certain whether these were Neanderthals or some other human-like species, but I believe our species encountered something that was very close to human. As a result, we developed an automatic response to anything that reminds our evolved minds of it. Whether this supposed human-like species still exists, I do not know. Story 62. That near-death experiences are real. I can provide academic sources, including a very recent study from October 2025, with reports from over 2,000 patients, along with books and testimonials, for those with a skeptical mindset who prefer empirical data like myself. The problem is that religion carries such a negative connotation, perhaps justly earned, that many people immediately shut down when the topic comes up. The objections are usually the same 5 to 10 points everyone repeats, many of which have already been addressed in works like Jeffrey Long, MD's Evidence of the Afterlife. And it is not even that near-death experiences have to be religious. At a minimum, they suggest something spiritual. But because spirituality and religion are so often lumped together, the stench of religion permeates the field and people push back out of impulse, rather than allowing their curiosity to take hold. I would think this is the most important question that every talk show, podcast, radio program, and news anchor would be discussing, especially in the age of the internet and given the number of studies that have been done. What happens after death is one of the most important questions there is. Yet it seems obvious to me, after investing hundreds of hours into the subject, that the vast majority of people do not bother looking into it. No matter how much we read or hear, though, it ultimately comes down to a leap of faith. I believe this simulation was designed this way on purpose. I have a few saved videos of people who have had near-death experiences explaining why this might be the case, but I have already typed enough. Story 63. That humanity is no longer evolving. Hear me out. This is not a creationist argument, and I'm not claiming that the current human form is some ultimate design that cannot be improved. Evolution arises from random mutation combined with natural selection. Random mutations occur all the time. Some have little to no impact, eye color for example, and are passed on to the next generation. Some are disadvantageous, such as being born without a limb, and make an individual less likely to survive and pass on their genetic material. Others provide an advantage, making survival and reproduction more likely. Over many generations, less desirable mutations tend to be filtered out, while more desirable ones are passed on and sometimes even amplified. But what happens when a species evolves to the point of sentience, able to manipulate and understand tools, build complex societies, develop science and technology, and then uses a significant portion of those advances to keep itself alive, even in spite of genetic disadvantage? Suddenly, many people with mutations that would have been severely disadvantageous in the Stone Age, and likely fatal, are living comparatively normal lives and passing their genes on to the next generation. If you remove the survival of the fittest element, the natural selection part, then it stops being evolution in the traditional sense and becomes mutation without meaningful filtering. This line of thought, however, quickly leads to dangerous and troubling ideas about eugenics. For that reason alone, it may be best not to push the theory too far, because the worst parts of society would only use it as justification to do awful things. Story 64. American politicians are smart. They're not dumb. Yes, even those who have run for president on both sides. American politics might be the fakest thing people believe in. It's basically rich actors cosplaying as though they're helping. We tend to forget that politicians are incredibly educated. Most of them hold graduate degrees, and even those who don't are surrounded by people who do. That makes a lot of them quite intelligent. Just for reference, Trump went to UPenn, Vance went to Yale, Ted Cruz went to Harvard, and so on. These people are not dumb. Do you really think Trump is that racist? That misogynistic? A UPenn grad? Really? And before you say, you can be educated and not smart, think about it. Does that really make sense? I bring this up because it's a common habit to assume that when a politician does something dumb, stupid, cruel, or mean, they're acting that way out of ignorance or malice. But remember, it's a show. These are highly educated individuals. They're not doing it because they truly believe it. They do it to grift for votes and power. Take Republicans, for example. They oppose abortion, want to secure the border, and advocate for relaxed gun laws. But they know, just like the rest of us, that abortion should be legal, that most undocumented immigrants overstay visas and are not more likely to be criminals, and that guns are dangerous. Their voter base, however, responds more to slogans like abortion bad, immigrants bad, and guns good. If their base suddenly shifted to abortion access good and gun control good, Republicans would likely change their stance immediately. People like Trump, McConnell, Haley, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and others don't necessarily believe what they say. They're not inherently racist or misogynistic, and they're not dumb. They're playing characters. Hell, we even refer to them as characters. Marjorie Taylor Greene, for instance, plays a persona named MTG, who says outrageous things to secure votes. Her district is very red. Do you really think she genuinely cares about guns or Trump? His goes for both sides. Take Sanders, for example. He talks about Medicare for all, yet it hasn't passed the Senate. What's more likely, that he genuinely cares, or that he's playing a character to win votes? If Biden truly cared about student debt, why hasn't it disappeared? If AOC cared about the Green New Deal, why hasn't it passed? These people are playing characters. Sanders' character is called Bernie, designed to connect with younger voters and his base in New England. AOC has crafted a persona appealing to millennials. Biden has embraced Dark Brandon to engage on social media. Do you really believe Trump is genuinely racist and misogynistic? A man who has starred in multiple reality TV shows? Do you really think Democrats truly care about healthcare when we still don't have universal coverage? Come on. Your most hated or most loved politicians are essentially highly educated actors. They know better. They're not dumb. They're performing. Story 65. The fine art industry exists largely as a convenient way to launder money. Think about it. Fine art is incredibly esoteric and highly niche. Few people without formal training truly understand it, and even those with some familiarity often cannot explain how a specific value is assigned to a piece. You have ultra-wealthy individuals buying carvings, handcrafts, jewelry, paintings, photographs, rare books, sculptures, sketches, and more. The general public has no clear sense of what these items are worth. People routinely pay hundreds of millions of dollars for a canvas or a hunk of metal, and nobody asks questions. The artist collects the money, and the buyer walks away with something that, at least on paper, is now worth exactly what they paid for it. Ultimately, this is all just capitalism. Something is only worth what someone else is willing to pay for it. But the art world is completely unregulated, and because it is such a small, specialized field, there is very little oversight. Many people in the art world seem to use this to their advantage. Their outwardly snobby, haughty, and condescending attitudes act as a defense mechanism, preventing the average person from questioning where all that money comes from and where it goes. It doesn't help that the loudest calls for regulation often come from aspiring artists, frustrated by how cruel and unforgiving the art world can be. You might assume that success in art is based on talent, but it isn't. Have you ever been to an art gallery? People with money fund art, and people with money often produce lazy, entitled kids who would rather call themselves artists than hold a real job. They have no problem studying art because their families can afford it, leaving them with the degrees, credentials, and connections necessary to succeed, regardless of actual skill or merit. This shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. Have you ever seen amateur theater? Many of the people involved could act circles around some who have made a name for themselves in the film industry, but they never made it because they don't have the same connections. This is true in nearly every aspect of life. Funny how the coach's son never gets cut from the team, isn't it? And it's not just wealthy people filling their mansions with bric-a-brac. It's everywhere. Companies, businesses, public spaces. All of the art you see has to come from somewhere. We're talking big budget stuff here. Billions upon billions of dollars. The amount of cash wasted on things that your eyes pass over without a second thought is staggering, obscene amounts of money. So yeah, I think it's a scam, and if you were to stop for just a minute and really think about it, I think you would agree. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.